name is Grayson Abner. I'm going to be talking about visual literacy and its importance to the field of public relations. But before we get into all of that, I wanted to describe what PR is to begin with. A lot of people kind of confuse PR and marketing as kind of the same thing. They'll say like, well, you know, PR and marketing. But there's actually some key differences. So, with PR, basically you can think about it as the business's relationship or organization's relationship to the consumer or its market. It's also crisis management, so if an organization messes up, that's where the PR person will come in and say, okay, here's why we're not evil. And then they also do philanthropic activity, so it's kind of like if you've ever seen Honda, you know, on stage and say, we're going to donate 10% of all our proceeds to some charitable cause. There's probably a PR person behind that. And more, there's lots of other things. Generally in the industry, they're working to kind of make PR people the customer advocate. So basically, ideally in a boardroom, you're going to have a PR person that says, okay, I like that idea. Is it benefiting people or is it negatively hurting them? Is it hurting them, you know, negatively? So they're just kind of the customer advocate, ideally, is what they should be at their best. But what does this have to do with visual culture, right? PR. We'll take a look up there. We are inundated in the 21st century with images. From the Kardashians to Times Square to Time Magazine, anywhere you look, you'll see an image. And since the 30s, it's only been increasing over time. With the rise of handheld cameras, to social media, to new streaming services, images are easier to access than ever before. But why is that, right? Why do companies use these images? Why do politicians use these images? Why are they so ingrained in our culture? They're just images, right? So I want to do a little bit of an exercise. I want you to look at that picture on the left. No, the right from your guys' perspective. What do you feel when you see that image? Bowman, what do you see?
I see a soldier returning home and seeing his little kid. And it makes me feel like, you know, it's the emotions.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? You don't know this soldier's name or her kid's name. You don't know what's going on. We can kind of see that it's at an airport and there's somebody walking behind them. Now, when I saw this image, as when a lot of people saw it, this was on a website and it had the 30 most powerful images of all time. The comments for that image were, I saw this and it brought me to tears. I saw this and I was just so moved, etc., etc. You get the idea. Now, a little bit more lighthearted. What about that one? What do you think of when you see that image? Peck, what do you see?
The Loch Ness Monster.
The Loch Ness Monster, right? The Loch Ness Monster is a terrible black and white image of something. That image alone has sparked international travel, documentaries, movies, sci-fi TV shows. This single image has changed the world. That's because there's power in an image. Humans have evolved to assimilate information, take it in, process it, and find meaning. From an evolutionary standpoint, that was a great way to survive. Claws, whiskers, danger, right? Pretty simple. Or berries, red, food, right? We have evolved to take in information that benefits us. What? We do the same thing today. Because images don't just represent images, right? That's just a black and white photo. That's just a color photo. But images represent ideas. And nobody understood that better than Leo Burnett. Leo Burnett was a marketer, really from the 40s to 90s. He marketed for a while. Now, even if you've never heard that name, you don't know the Marlboro Man, you probably know the Jolly Green Giant, you probably know the Pillsbury Doughboy. That's because this man revolutionized the world of visual imagery as a marketing tactic. Leo Burnett understood that you weren't selling a product, you were selling an idea. So, to explain that a little better, I want to talk about the campaign that changed the world, the Marlboro Man. So, back in the 50s, there was some science going around that filtered cigarettes were healthier. Obviously, they were not. But at the time, that was the idea. And Marlboro was a filtered cigarette company. For whatever reason, filtered cigarettes had a feminine connotation. People thought if you smoked filtered cigarettes, it was seen as like really feminine. So Marlboro was not doing so hot, right? So they go to Leo and they say, we need guys to buy our cigarettes. Long story short, he comes up with the Marlboro Man campaign because what's more manly than a cowboy, right? So up until Leo Burnett hit the scene, marketing on TV was in its infancy, we'll say. It was basically one guy, he'd walk up with a box of Cheerios and say, buy Cheerios, they're healthy and taste good. And that was it. But Leo Burnett said, we can do better. He understood images represent ideas. And he combined Marlboro cigarettes with the idea of manliness, ruggedness, handsomeness, and toughness. Overnight, Marlboro went from one of the bottom cigarette companies to the #1 selling cigarette company in the world in the span of just 8 months. Now, obviously, hugely successful campaign. He understood the culture that he was marketing in. In the 50s, Westerns were hugely popular. John Wayne, people loved that. So he hopped on that trend because he understood the culture he was set in. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more. But that is called lifestyle marketing. It essentially says, if you buy this product, your life will look like this. Pretty simple concept, but it revolutionized the way PR and marketing operated. So, let's talk a little bit about consumer behavior and perspective. So, we need to understand that everyone sees things from a different perspective. No two people see things the same way. If we go back to this right here, if you come from a military family, that image is going to take on probably a lot more meaning because you can relate to it. If you come from somebody who has a completely different background and maybe has a lot of negative feelings about the military, that image is just another family split up by war. You're upset by that image. Everybody has a different perspective. But I think we can agree as PR people that understanding your audience is a lot like seeing that from their perspective. So although, yes, everyone sees things from a different perspective, oftentimes your audience will have a similar life experience that puts them in, similar categories. So that's where strategic public relations comes in. You want to understand what your target audience or your market, where they're looking at life from, so you can come in at the ground level and relate to them. And then once you understand that, you can find the right visual message that really is tailored to your audience. For example, if you're trying to do some public outreach to Alcoholics Anonymous, you probably don't want to set your advertising campaign in a bar or drinking on the beach, right? But if you don't take the time to understand your audience, you might not think about that. So understanding your audience is vitally important. Now, this is the part that's never fun to talk about: ethics and public relations. Public relations has not always had a good reputation. They've been known as kind of the spin guys, or the people that kind of shuck responsibility off companies. BP oil spill is a perfect example of that. They had a PR person come in, try and salvage it. Kind of worked, but people always cite, big, just catastrophic events like that. And just like, oh, well, they're just going to pull their PR team in. And unfortunately, they're not always wrong. But at its core, public relations is what I was saying at the beginning, customer advocates. So, what does this have to do with images? Well, we understand that images have meaning, and everybody has their own perspective. It's important to understand when you're operating and doing public relations to be honest with your imagery. You don't want to spin a story in an inaccurate way. You can take an image from one perspective and it looks like one way, take it from another, it looks the complete opposite. But why is it so important to be ethical? Well, you have to have trust when you're doing public relations, because trust is a two-way street. If you don't instill trust in your audience, they're not going to want anything to do with you. Also, civic duty. This is something that's been advocated a lot for in the public relations community lately, is this consumer first mentality and how you have a civic duty to leave a better impact as a company than when you started. This has been highlighted in a lot of new ethics campaigns in education. So for example, here at the University of Mount Union, we teach an ethics class for public relations. And then, like I was saying earlier, a consumer first mentality. So keeping all of this in mind, this is the references for my presentation. Keeping this in mind, hopefully you can use your images in a positive way the next time you are practicing PR. Thank you.